Hi there, this is the video for the lesson 3.05, New Strategies. And here, let's look at the cartoon first. We have President Roosevelt there in the middle. His medicine bag says New Deal remedies. This little nurse here on the side, the apron says Congress. And then we here have this older man sitting down. We can tell that's Uncle Sam. And we see all these medicine bottles as with the abbreviations for the different New Deal problems, like the New Deal programs like the CCC, the AAA, the NRA, all these different ones. And he is saying, of course, we may have to change remedies if we don't get results. So it's just the cartoon is representing that Franklin Roosevelt was willing to try different remedies to end the Great Depression through all the different programs they were enacting during the New Deal. Some people characterized Franklin Roosevelt's first term as a sea of alphabet soup. There were the CCC, the WPA, the AAA, the TVA, the HOLC, the FDIC, the NLRB, and others. That is alphabet soup. His second term took a new approach, but the goal was the same, to pull the nation out of the Great Depression. Roosevelt had opponents on both the right and the left, and historians still argue about the effectiveness of the New Deal. Goals for this lesson. Assess the goals and effects of key legislation passed during the Second New Deal. Recognize the causes and results of the resurgence of labor unions during the New Deal era, and summarize historians' views of the New Deal and arguments that continue. Make sure you go to your lesson resources, grab your reading guide and/or lesson answer key, and let's start what we need to do today. Read pages 695 through 709. So let's start here on page 695, Opposition to the New Deal. And let's look at the cartoon here on the bottom left. No, bottom right, I mean. In this 1934 cartoon, the New Deal produced a swirly alphabet soup of acts and agencies. And just like there was in the other cartoon we saw at the beginning of the lesson. Opposition to the New Deal. Roosevelt had given the country a strong dose of hope, but the New Deal programs could not work instantly. As the Depression dragged on and discontent mounted, many people began to distrust the New Deal's drift toward a large federal bureaucracy and centralized state power. Still others complained that FDR had not gone far enough. The Supreme Court says no. Roosevelt found that his programs faced some powerful opponents in the Supreme Court of the United States. The programs of the early New Deal, especially the National Recovery Administration and the Agricultural Adjustment Act, gave the federal government power to direct and regulate the national economy as never before. Roosevelt saw these measures as helpful to everyone, business and workers alike. But corporate leaders feared that government was gaining too much power over business. They stood firm in their belief that government should maintain a laissez-faire philosophy toward business. So they challenged the New Deal with lawsuits, some of which made their way to the Supreme Court. In the mid-1930s, the court's 9 members were split into 3 groups. 4 were conservatives who upheld the ideals of states' rights and rugged individualism. They saw the New Deal as a big step down a slippery slope towards centralized control of all economic activity. 2 justices, including Chief Justice Charles Evan Hughes, were swing votes. They held moderate views and hoped to steer a middle course. And 3 members of the court were more liberal in their views, sharing the progressive confidence in an active government, especially in a time of financial crisis. The 3 liberal justices believed that FDR's New Deal programs were constitutional. Justice Harlan Fiske Stone argued that critics of the New Deal failed to understand the irreconcilable conflict between the demands of individual liberty and the necessities of an increasingly complex civilization, in which every individual and every group becomes increasingly interdependent with one another. Let's read this excerpt here on the side. Liberals and conservative. During the New Deal era, political attitudes in the United States aligned in ways that persist today. Liberals, said to be on the left, favor government regulation of the economy as a way to protect ordinary people from the potential abuses of big business. Liberals believe that government should aid needy individuals directly through assistance, education, and health programs, and indirectly through higher taxes on business and the wealthy. From FDR's time up to this day, liberals tend to be Democrats. On the right are conservatives, who favor a more laissez-faire economic philosophy with little government regulation of business. Conservatives favor lower taxes and fewer government programs, policies that they believe will lead to greater economic prosperity for all. Conservatives tend to be Republicans. In the center are moderates, who may or may not align with either majority party, and whose views may vary depending on the specific issue. All right, continuing on. Okay, here we are. But the conservative voices on the court prevailed, and some decisions were joined by the liberal justices. The court ruled that a string of New Deal initiatives violated the U.S. Constitution, the National Recovery Act, the Federal Farm Bankruptcy Act, and the Agricultural Adjustment Act. In his 9-1 majority opinion striking down the NIRA, Chief Justice Hughes said that Roosevelt's administration interpretation of the Constitution implied virtually no limit to the federal power, and for all practical purposes we should have completely centralized government. Roosevelt grumbled that the court was enforcing a horse and buggy definition of what the government could do to fight the Depression. Voices of protest. While challenges to the New Deal programs were making their way through the courts, the protest movements against Roosevelt's initiatives emerged on both the radical left and the conservative right. One voice that made FDR especially uneasy was that of Huey P. Long of Louisiana. After 3.5 years as governor, Long joined the U.S. Senate in 1932. He kept one hand on his political machine at home while he plotted a run for the presidency with the other. He supported FDR in 1932, but soon turned against him, Long ridiculed the president as Prince Franklin. Long called for a radical redistribution of wealth from rich to poor. He proposed a Share Our Wealth program that would heavily tax wealthy Americans to guarantee an income to the poorest citizens. Though Long never explained how this plan would work, he became a political celebrity and was spoken as a possible challenger for the 1936 Democratic presidential nomination. Another outspoken critic of Roosevelt was Father Charles Coughlin, a Catholic priest whose weekly radio show reached millions of devoted listeners. In 1933, Coughlin called the New Deal Christ's deal, but as the election of 1936 approached, Coughlin was calling the president the great betrayer and liar, Franklin double-crossing Roosevelt. Like Huey Long, Coughlin was an economic populist and called for a share of the wealth scheme, but his economic message was mixed with increasingly extremist and bigoted views. For example, he attacked FDR as a sinister ally of godless capitalists, the Jews, communists, international bankers, and plutocrats. And look on the side here, a plutocrat as a ruler whose power derives from great wealth. From the West came another radical cry. Francis Townsend, a California physician, proposed giving a monthly pension of $200 to every American over the age of 60 on 2 conditions: that he or she retire, and 2, spend all the money each month. Theoretically, the Townsend plan would open jobs for young people, help the aged poor, and stimulate the economy. Economists were sure that Townsend's scheme, like Huey Long's Share Their Wealth plan, would never work. Nevertheless, Townsend clubs soon sprang up across the United States, and his proposals did compel people to consider the needs of the elderly and the retired. For a long time it looked as if the followers of Long, Townsend, and Coughlin might join ranks in a mass movement. But Long was assassinated in 1935. As Father Coughlin's radio broadcast turned to extremist rants, the Catholic Church compelled them to stop broadcasting and resume life as a parish priest. The Townsend plan simply fizzled out. Still, these rumblings on the right and left helped prompt Roosevelt to devise a new series of measures that went beyond even the bold initiatives of the 100 Days. These new programs and reforms constituted what is often called the Second New Deal. The Second New Deal. 2 years into his presidency, facing a lingering depression and critics on both the left and right, FDR confided to an aide, "All the smart people think that what we should do is compromise and temporize with the situation, but I am inclined to fight." And fight he did. He demanded that Congress stay in session through the sweltering summer of 1935 to pass the raft of new measures that made up the Second New Deal. Putting people to work. And let's look at the poster here. Roosevelt's Second New Deal created jobs for millions. And we see this work relief picture. And the caption, "Rebuilding the Self-Respect of 1.5 million American workmen." Because that's something important to keep in mind, that people wanted jobs because they felt worthless, because they could not support their families and they could not provide. And so it's not only providing jobs, but also bringing their self-respect back. Putting people to work. Roosevelt was no fan of direct payments to the poor, which he called a narcotic, a subtle destroyer of the human spirit. He wanted the jobless to have jobs, private sector jobs in a recovered economy if possible, but government or public sector jobs if necessary. And here, let's look at the caption. In the economy, private sector refers to businesses and corporations, while the public sector refers to government-run enterprises. So when he called for $5 billion in new relief funds, he targeted those funds for work programs. The biggest new program was the Works Progress Administration, the WPA, which built or added on to thousands of hospitals, schools, airports, and playgrounds. Between 1935 and 1943, the WPA employed about 8.5 million people. Roosevelt also poured in new money into the Public Works Administration, which had been launched in 1933. The new funds went to huge projects like New York's Triborough Bridge, Washington's Grand Coulee Dam, and the Overseas Highway in the Florida Keys. Structures in many cities and towns still bear the stamp WPA. Another WPA program, the National Youth Administration, NYA, was designed to assist young people who one new dealer described them had grown up against a shut door. The NYA offered courses to improve skills in reading, writing, and arithmetic. To more than 2 million students in high school and college, the NYA provided part-time work that helped many complete their education. A New Deal for the Arts. Harry Hopkins, the hard-driving social worker who headed the Work Progress Administration, included artists and writers among the people who needed a hand. They've got to eat just like other people, he said. At the urging of Eleanor Roosevelt, Hopkins set up 4 federal projects that gave jobs to thousands of unemployed artists, musicians, writers, and actors. The work they did kept food on their tables and vastly enriched the cultural experience of their generation. The WPA brought music and drama to people who had never heard a symphony or seen a play. A production of Macbeth was staged in Harlem with an all-black cast directed by a young Orson Welles. The Federal Music Project put Texas fiddlers and Indiana jug bands on a stage and sponsored symphony concerts across the country. On the walls of hundreds of schools and post offices, artists were sent by the WPA to paint murals depicting scenes from American history. The WPA set up the Federal Writers Project. More than 6,000 writers were hired to produce the American Guide series, a collection of detailed travel guides to each of the 48 states and some major cities. Federal Writers Project employees also produced collections of folklore and oral histories, including slave narratives, first-person accounts based on interviews of formerly enslaved people. Some who wrote for the Writers Project would become major figures in American literature, including the novelists Richard Wright, Ralph Ellison, and Saul Bellow. Much WPA art celebrated the struggles and contributions of working people and the common man. Some productions, especially those by the Federal Theater Project, expressed political messages that leaned well to the left. For example, controversial topics from the current headlines, such as federal funding for farmers or work in the Tennessee Valley Authority, were dramatized in short plays called living newspapers. The political messages in these productions angered congressional conservatives who said that artists were being paid to spread New Deal or even communist propaganda. After 4 years, the project's funds were cut off. Of the art produced, FDR himself called it some of it good, some of it not so good, but all of it native, human, eager, and alive. And let's scroll up here. Look at the picture. Many WPA-sponsored artworks, such as this mural, celebrate the achievements of working people and the common man. So everything from scientists to the workman, to the draftsman, to the engineer, to those building the buildings. And I encourage you to go out into your area and look at your post offices, look at your schools, go to a state park, and you will likely find something that has an imprint of a New Deal program, especially if it's older. I mean, if you have a brand new school in your area, that doesn't really count, but lots of schools were built on or added to in the 1930s as part of these public works programs. And state parks too, a lot of them were developed different things during from the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. But now let's read Bringing Electricity to the Farm. In rural areas, the most welcome reform came in the shape of towering poles and electrical wires courtesy of the Rural Electrification Administration. By 1935, most urban dwellers had electricity, but close to 9 out of 10 families still live without electric light, running water, or refrigeration. Private utility companies claimed that rural areas had too few customers to make electrification profitable in the countryside. Created in 1935, the Rural Electrification Administration proceeded to set up nonprofit public cooperatives that brought electricity to regions far from the cities. Despite resistance from utility companies, which believed the government should not be in the business of providing electricity, the program succeeded. Within 3 years, some 350 cooperatives in 45 states were providing electricity to 1.5 million farms. And we'll stop this video here and continue on with